Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. And do I bother even asking the question anymore? How are you doing? What do you say anymore? What's happening? What's going, we are redoing the Iraq war with Iran now. So great. I remember living through those times and how fucking angry and depressed I was during the Bush years. There's that quote, history repeats itself, first as a tragedy, second as a farce, and then third, I guess, as a children's book written by a mass murderer. Feeling good. Feeling like I need some distraction, which is great because today's episode is fantastic. It's Michael DeForge, and if you do not know who Michael is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Ottawa, comics creator Michael DeForge had been making mini and web comics for years before he created his first quote-unquote real comic, his words, Lose, which was published by Koyama Press in 2009. Since then, he's published over a dozen books and collections through publishers like Koyama and Drawn and Quarterly, and also worked as a designer on Adventure Time for 6 seasons. His latest book, Holy Lacrimony, was published through Drawn and Quarterly just a few months ago, and it is fantastic. I knew I read some of Michael's stuff before, I think maybe in Kramer's Ergot or something, but I don't know if I was that familiar with him before I picked up Holy Lacrimony on a whim, and holy shit, it's so good. And Michael himself was a true pleasure to talk to. We start off by discussing Canadian politics, and it goes from there. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Coming up on the show, Kelly Sue DeConnick. Her latest book, FML, is wonderful. I love it. We had a really cool talk. Who else? Daniel Littleton from Ida. We talk about his punk days in the 1980s and punk bands outside of DC. That was really cool and interesting. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Michael. What's the vibe in Canada? How are you? We said, how are you? Before I hit record on this, we asked each other how we are. But whenever you ask that question, it's always going to be just a polite, good or fine. But I'm curious, what is the real vibe inside your heart at the moment?
Oh, sure. I mean, I assume everyone's feeling a bit apocalyptic. The vibe in Canada overall it was interesting. I was in the States last month, or maybe a bit over a month ago. And everyone obviously had questions about, like, how's Canada doing? And it's weird because, especially like as a Canadian, as a leftist Canadian, when you go to, your role is to always be like, well, Canada's not so good. But it felt kind of silly talking to Americans because it's like, with the caveat that it's not as bad as things are in America.
Sure.
Canada is not looking so great right now. So yeah, it was funny, like, especially over the past few months, to like talk to Americans where it's like, yeah, I get why Canada's not looking so bad to someone living in the States. But yeah, we just had an election. Everyone feels sort of, it's sort of like a grim feeling all around, but not quite as apocalyptic as if I were to drive south a few hours, I suppose.
Sure. You haven't started building concentration camps yet.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not exactly the same situation. So
yeah. So okay, great place to start out. By the way, this is just like I'm trying to like get the gunk out of my heart talking to another person, because I don't know how it is with you, but like my wife and I, it's just like, the vibe is apocalyptic. So it's like very difficult, when we're having just conversations, just getting ready for, for her for work or, whatever, it's tough it's like starting out in a pit every day. And you're like, can I climb out of it? Can I at least get to the point where I can like kind of stare at, like get out front and like see out from the pit?
Yeah.
So
I feel like I'm getting used to just living in the pit, like here's life in the pit, for better or worse. But yeah, I'm used to the pit. Its decor, its contours, they're very familiar to me now. So.
Who's your new prime minister? Or not new, or Carrie? What's his name?
Mark Carney. He's like
Carney.
a bank guy. So he's, he's like a reskin. He's still the Liberal Party, so he's just a reskin of the last guy, but slightly more reactionary, but has
good.
less of a bad track record that Trudeau kind of accumulated through the years. But yeah, he's just sort of he's like a bank guy, and he kind of fulfills a lot of the, there was the guy he beat had kind of like a Canadian MAGA stink to him a little bit, which was very successful for him for a while. But since Trump started doing the kind of 51st state saber rattling Terra 4 things with Canada, there's been like a big turn against that and like a big swing towards like a type of Canadian nationalism that made the Conservative candidate suddenly the dip he took in the polls like over the course of a few weeks was like going from surefire win to completely untenable. And I think Carney kind of fulfills he's very uncharismatic, he's very boring, and I think he fulfills that like Canadian if I were to ascribe a character to Canada, there's like a lot of tall poppy syndrome. There's like people want a very boring person at the wheel. And it doesn't actually have to be a steady hand at the wheel, but it has to be the perception of a steady hand at the wheel, like someone who seems kind of like a boring dad, I guess. So, which is maybe the kindest thing I could say about Mark Carney is that he embodies a boring dad that many of my fellow Canadians apparently find quite comforting. I don't necessarily feel the same way, but I get the appeal, and yeah, so he's that.
He's your Keir Starmer.
There has been a lot of talk that he is that, yeah, like to a T. So yeah, and we've seen how popular he's remained over there. So I'm sure the same will happen with Carney.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely the people you want their hands on the wheel as global fascism is rising.
Yeah, we'll see. So I'm not very optimistic about Canada. I think one of the more interesting things is that where I live in Ontario, we had a recent election too, and a Conservative premier won, and he also kind of won largely on the fumes of anti-Trump, fighting the Terra 4 against Trump. So there's something interesting with the fact that where I am, both the election of my province and then the election of the federal election were both kind of decided by Trump. So it's felt very weird. We're just, I mean, it's common Canadian thing was just we're reacting to whatever is going on south of the border.
Yeah. Yes. That's been a theme on the show every time I've talked to someone who is from Canada, which is it almost exists as a reaction to America in some way.
Yeah, throughout sort of Canadian settler identity, we're usually either defining ourselves in relation to America or relation to Britain. And I think our own sense of identity is pretty muddy.
Right. Does that matter to you? That, I don't know if I care. I ask this because I'm do I really care what outside of it not being Nazism, do I care what an American character is? I guess I care in the abstract, in the sense of what America should stand for, what the symbolism, the PR of the country is in terms of freedom and the kind of stuff that's written on the Statue of Liberty. But I don't know if I care one way or the other. I'm not a nationalist. I'm not
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you care, if Canada had some kind of national identity, would that even matter to you?
No, I think I'm probably in a similar place where it matters to me as much as horrible things that we carry out as a country are done in the name of some supposed character. But like Canada itself, it's like it's a settler colonial construct. Like I'm largely against Canada. I
Right.
believe in land back. Like I'm
Right.
not. So so I think I'm only interested in it as much as like, yeah, a lot of the things we do both like domestically and then overseas are done in the name of some sort of like set of Canadian beliefs or ideals, and those beliefs and ideals are largely like monstrous. So that is
Yeah.
tends to be like how the angle that I approach it from, I guess. So I think we're probably in a similar place with that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think one of the difficult things about living in America in the 21st century, and I wonder if this is similar for you in Canada, is that the constructed image has become so false that trying to pull back the curtain from it. There's so many shitty metaphors here, but like let's go back to this original one. The false image has become so omnipresent that trying to pick reality out of it is like bobbing for apples in a giant tub and there's two apples. There, metaphor landed. Solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to that, especially with like these myths are so ingrained, like, and even as sort of someone who, like I grew up with like it's kind of that ill-defined teenage punk, like a vague anti-authoritarian politic, but not a very well-defined one. And it wasn't until way later where like even being skeptical about the narratives around Canada, where you learn like, oh, we've done really horrible there's sort of one of the more common Canadian things is that our role overseas is as like peacekeepers. Like we're not like other imperialist countries where the peacekeeper we're like the referees or whatever. And I kind of knew that was silly, but then when you like look into our foreign interventions and see like, oh, it's not just silly, like this is quite awful. And then like those weren't things until and this like other people more directly affected by like Canada's military interventions, like that wouldn't be something they learned in their early 20s, but for me it was something I learned in my early 20s. And I think there's a lot of like Canadian myth making things that are like that. And I'd say too, there was like the recent swing towards sort of like corny Canadian nationalism in response to Trump. It came after there was at least a bit more of a reckoning, like it, and it, I sort of say that knowing that like it was more of a performative reckoning. It wasn't like a lot of institutions really, governmental or otherwise, really tried to address it, but where there was a lot more talk about Canada's history as a settler colonial nation and talking about residential schools, talking about drinking water in Indigenous communities, and like actually trying to like there was this brief few years where it seemed like, okay, like this is at least part of what people think of when they think of Canada. Like it's not, and it wasn't like that. No system got dismantled, like there was no big revolutionary thing, but it was something that like people actually had to address. Even if it was just in a lip service way. And I think this swing towards like rah Canada, I stand on guard for thee, I am Canadian, like we're into beaver tails and Molson beer and stuff, that I think has had the vibe of like a lot of people saying, thank God I don't have to like think about this stuff anymore. Like I can go back to like thinking about the other thing,
Yeah. It's almost, I was going to say, it's almost interesting. I don't even know how to characterize this, but, here in 2020, there was a kind of slight reckoning, a very slight, like, let's say 0.02% reckoning when there were a lot of with the civil rights remix, the George Floyd protests. And in the wake of that, it seemed like there could have been something, we could have built something a little kinder a little more empathetic. But instead, it seems like what happened was just showing people, having them have to recognize that the way America actually is made them so furious. And it revealed the contradictions to them when they just wanted to live a kind of like pleasant life, ignoring the inequality and murder and everything else that it's built on, that they went fascist in some way.
Yeah, like it's people really don't like having that cognitive dissonance, like it's
Yeah.
and I often think like if I think about this both in like terms of um uh my art, and then also in terms of just like I do work as an organizer sometimes like outside of my art world or whatever. And in both cases I frequently think about like a lot of that work being about people forcing people to live with some amount of cognitive dissonance, like forcing the issue, creating a crisis, making people like just have to grapple with some of these contradictions, not always knowing or being like, with my art I try not to be as prescriptive about where they might wind up at the end of it, versus organizing or whatever. But like I do think about that a lot, as like if my artwork can be at all productive, and I don't think all art needs to like be that materially useful or productive. Like
Sure.
I do sometimes think about that as like I want people to really like sit with this wretched feeling. Part of it is like I feel like I'm sitting with it all the time. It's like I don't want to just soothe people. I want people to actually feel quite like oh, this is a tension that can't be resolved. At least can't be resolved when I finish this book. Like this is a tension that like I have to like keep with me a little bit.
Well, I mean, I want to get to a lot of this, but very quickly, this idea of cognitive dissonance, it seems like for a lot of people, this is just a generalization anecdotally based on no evidence, so take it with a grain of salt, they will do the easiest thing to get rid of it, right? Because the thing you would think you would do is you have this contradiction in society. You would say, well, why don't we try to build a society where that contradiction isn't the main force at the center of it, right? And that's difficult, right? That's going to take generations to do that. Instead, people are just like, well, can't we just like kill all the people that are annoying us, or ship them to El Salvador, or make them never leave their house, or whatever? And that somehow that's easier.
Yeah. I mean, and I get like it's especially as a leftist, like a lot of what gets proposed seems daunting, but there's that thing of like, well, the current thing is awful and unsustainable. Like the current thing is just it's leading us to like we're in hell. It's like
yeah.
Like we're already living in hell. It's not like hey, things are going to get bad. It's like things are bad. Like everyone is suffering. No one is happy. And it's about like convincing people that like, well, okay, building the other thing, like it will be difficult, but things are already difficult. Like things already suck. Building something new also sucks. I hate building stuff. But it already sucks, and it's like hard to like, and I get why it's a hard sell. And I also, I guess, yeah, one other thing about cognitive dissonance too. I think like, I think about this in terms of the art I make as well, especially when it comes up in my work. Is I was seeing someone kind of point out the other day. I forget who. I was seeing someone talk about like, despite America having this sort of fascistic government, there's a lot of art that at least like gestures towards anti-fascism or some sort of like resistance or rebellion narrative. And they were pointing out like very popular like pop culture examples, like the new Daredevil show, and I think that the Star Wars show Andor, things like that. Sinners. Yeah. Some of those like are movies and TV shows I like. Some of them I don't, But we're sort of pointing out like, isn't that interesting? There's this like fascist government in place, and then there's all of this art that is sort of being like rejecting that. And I was thinking how like that is sort of interesting, but it's also those two aren't actually that opposed to each other, because a lot of people will watch a video of a Nazi getting punched and feel as though they punched a Nazi by watching that video and then just
Uh-huh.
stay at home, you know. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
that I think there's like a lot of ways that cognitive dissonance gets reconciled, even if it isn't a full embrace of fascism. There's ways people end up like embracing that dissent into it, even if they're ostensibly like against it and maybe even have good politics because of like all of these ways that like you're kind of just soothed or pacified, you know, which isn't to say like that's the intention of any of these shows, but like
No.
that is a thing that happens, you know.
Okay, so when I was in grad school, I think one of the things that kind of really pushed me into materialist politics was I wrote a paper. I was really interested in pranks. I went to grad school for philosophy. I was going to be a professor. Just there's the backstory. There's all the backstory you need.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wrote a paper on the art of disturbation, which is just public pranks. And I looked at all the kind of like postmodern public pranks that were going on in the 70s. And the idea behind them was that, hey, this art we're doing in public that is against the kind of, I'm going to say fascistic. I mean, it was Nixon then, but like still, you know, I mean, quaint at this point, but
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's against this kind of right-wing governing, yet none of it ever changed a thing. And it really kind of made me rethink, well, what is art's role in politics? Is there a role? Does it push anything? Does pop culture push anything? Or is it just a reflection of how society is organized already? And then I'm also out here in Los Angeles, and I was going to say write TV. I sell TV shows that never get made is essentially what my job is. And you see what's actually allowed. What are the boundaries of what you're allowed to say? It seems like in sci-fi, like Andor or something like that, you're allowed to kind of like talk about about what's going on. Or Daredevil, or I guess right. Wilson Fisk is supposed to be like a Trump type. Nothing ever gets it right, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm like, well, is that stuff? Now here's the question. I don't know if you have an answer, but does art in a more liberal period not really push anyone politically, but perhaps in a more fascist period gives people something to focus on? I have no idea if again, this is just sparked out of what we were just talking about. I've never thought about it before until now. Like, was there a paradigm change that makes something like Andor, again, not really that, but like a little more politically, a little more like a little more puts people's foot on the pedal to actually push them to doing something? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think for examples like that, like it's hard to imagine anything like that being potent enough to push someone to action.
Right.
But I feel like that's just also, which is also isn't like a criticism of the art itself. Like
Sure.
I don't think that necessarily needs to be its job. But there are examples of art that like do push people, but I think it has to be art that is made in conjunction or dialogue with an actual movement, you know, like, and I think this is like a very, it's certainly like a thing that I feel in like North America or the West broadly is like a very individualistic idea of like, I am the artist, I am the truth teller. You will like read this book and you'll come out of it like a revolutionary. You'll come out of it like with your eyes open to the world. You know, I've like lifted the veil, and I think that is a hard feeling to shake. And I'll say like it as someone who you know, my tendency as an author is to like work alone. That's why I have set up the life I have, and it made it a bit of a hurdle to start having to think of things collectively and like strategize collectively.
Uh-huh.
And with art in particular, I think artists are encouraged to always, like, if they want to respond to something politically, they're encouraged to only ever respond to it through their art. And I think it's good that artists respond to things through their art, and I do it myself. And movements need art, and like that's good. And I think art can point out inequities or articulate feelings of like, hey, something's wrong, and it took this piece of art for me to like see it actually articulated. That's happened a lot with like art that has influenced me. But when you only engage in the world that way, like the system is sort of like taking that into account. Like it has taken like that, like it's already like figured out all the ways to respond to it, and there are other ways. Like I'm an artist, but I'm also like a worker. I'm an arts worker, and they're like that's a way I can respond to something. And I'm also a part of a community, and I'm a tenant, and I'm all of these other things. Like I live in a neighborhood, and like there are people around me and formations I'm in that aren't just related to the content of a comic I draw or a poster I draw. And um, yeah, I think it's just common that you're only encouraged to just think of it in terms of like the drawing. Like I hate the police, so I'm going to draw a cop car on fire. Which is something I've done. I do that a lot. Like I've drawn so many cop cars on fire, for lots of purposes. But there are also other ways, like that's not the only leverage I have, is making a drawing. So, yeah. So I think there's like, there's ways that art can be like potent and can be inciting in positive ways and productive ways. But I think, there's a tendency to like be very narrow about how artists conceptualize themselves and conceptualize the role art has.
Okay, well, let me go back a little bit because I am curious. When you were a teenager, I think you said, I don't know if you used this word, but paraphrasing you had like vague politics, vague anti-authoritarian politics, vague, punk type kinds of things. One of the things I was thinking of was the role of how music pushed me politically. How I only in retrospect did I realize, like when I was younger, my first inkling that things were maybe not the way I was told they were. Again, this American myth that I was not fed, but it's just there. You're just kind of like swimming in it, right? Was Fugazi, was a lot of like, well, other Discord bands, but Fugazi and Sonic Youth and Rage Against the Machine. And there was a lot of this stuff going on when I was a teenager. And I'm wondering, what was your entryway into maybe things are not the way I was told, or where maybe it was always like that? I don't know. I'm curious.
No, like it likely would have been through punk. And then I kind of at the same time I was getting into punk. I had already been reading superhero comics, but it was high school when I started seeing like alternative comics, zines, things like that. And yeah, and in those cases it was both like the stated values of those scenes, more than even sometimes the content of the like the comic itself or the music itself, and sometimes seeing the dissonance between like the stated value of a punk scene and then the actual values of a punk scene, and experiencing firsthand the way those clash. But yeah, like in high school, like I started listening to punk and hardcore, and then got very into like a lot of like noise bands, and I did a lot of posters in high school. That was kind of like when I first started putting my art somewhere that wasn't like Live Journal or whatever. Was doing posters around town. Just basically like I wanted to get into shows for free, so I talked to a few promoters and was like, oh, and I was also underage. So I was like, if you can just like let me into these concerts, I'll do any poster you want. And in retrospect, I'm like, it would have been nice if they paid me, this like eager high school kid. Like if I was in the same position, I would have like given some kid like maybe more than just a guest list. But I was like, it was sort of how I cut my teeth, and then just from there went into all these different rabbit holes, and some of that was like, yeah, getting interested in. It's like, oh, like everyone here is talking about like these certain politics. Like I'm hearing about anarchism a lot. I'm hearing about communism a lot. Like I should like read up on that stuff. And then also just through all of like through the other things of like, here is like what DIY means past using a photocopier, or here are all these like other pockets of history that like this might be art you'd like. So yeah, I think of that as sort of the, aside from the superhero comics and comic strips I grew up in, that was my like where I got my art education, I suppose, was like that kind of scene, like mid 2000s noise and punk and some of the comics happening around then.
I guess here's the deeper question though. Why did that resonate with you? You know, there's a lot of people who they will, again, catch a whiff of that stuff. And either there's a psychological kind of like recognition that that's true. And so they kind of allergically step away from it. Like, I don't want to have to deal with it. You know, we're now like, this is just the tip of the iceberg and I don't want to deal with the rest of the iceberg. So I'm just going to, again, I don't know where this metaphor is going. I did not sleep well last night, but right. You could have been one of those people. What was it that it resonated with you about it where you're like, well, I'm going to investigate this further?
Part of it is just I have that tendency of like going down rabbit holes, and music and comics like are just good for that, where it's like I don't want just this thing. I want every single thing that this author has drawn, including every short story, and I want to see their early zines. And like it's the same with music. It's like I want to see everything on this label, even if it's a band that only put out like 2 singles. I want to hear them. And I think some of it is also just like the usual cliches of like I was a pretty poorly adjusted kid. I did not excel in school and was not well liked amongst my peers, like many cartoonists. Like the all the cliched stuff about being like a kid who just spent all day drawing and I was like not well liked. And the punk scene like appealed to me both because there's other people who seemed to be interested in like in drawing and making stuff the way I was, and I was like, oh, like I before I had some path of like I like drawing comics, but like I was at like 12 or 13 I already knew I was like, okay, I'm drawing like kind of weird comics. Like I'm not going to be like John Romita Jr. or something like that. That's just not the arc that I'm going to have. And it was sort of unclear, like, okay, well, what type of comics do I make? And then suddenly I see all these like, oh, there's like lots of types of comics to make. Like I don't have to look at this. I can, as my path, I like, here's Chester Brown, here's Linda Berry, here's, Brian Chippendale, all these Charles Burns, all these like avenues started to open up to me. But yeah, like I think like I probably initially just started hanging around those places because it's like, okay, this is like a place that like I don't know if I would say is strong. Like I felt some amazing sense of belonging, but I certainly like felt more at home there than I did like the other social spaces available to me as like a 14, 15-year-old.
Yeah.
Dweeb,
Yeah. Was it just introvertedness or were you reacting to something that you didn't like in the culture of your school or something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was both. I don't know. My personality with stuff has just sort of shaken out where if like I don't like something, like I just leave. Like I was already I'm like that skeleton meme or like the share zones meme where it's the skeleton, like you can just leave. And yeah, it's like my high school experience was just defined by like me, like going to a diner and drawing and skipping. Like I wasn't skipping class to do anything cool, like I wasn't like having sex or doing interesting drugs, like I would skip class and like read comics and then like go to a record store and just like listen to music. And so it was like really
that's kind of cool.
Tame. Yeah, I mean, it was just like tame type of rebellion because. And yeah, that sort of was played out in like many employment situations, or it played out when I didn't stay in university very long. So yeah, I just sort of bounced.
That's interesting. See, because I was always like, well, I'm going to try to triangulate between the culture of whatever group that I don't really like, and I'm going to try to be myself, and I'm going to try to force them together and make it work. And it never does very well. And I always like have to like hide some opinions to fit in. And it took me a while to be like, to get to where you were when you were a teenager, where it's just like, I'm just not going to deal with this, or I'll deal with it as much as I have to, and then just do my own thing.
Yeah. I think at a certain age, I feel like it happened to me early, where I think like, most adults at a certain age, ideally they realize like, okay, like I don't I shouldn't have to like try so hard, to make this thing smooth. And
Right.
like at some point, I think ideally someone like hits that realization. And I think it happened early on for me where I was just so like, I felt like everything just felt so like abrasive to me. And I just felt like I don't like there's so much friction everywhere like that. Um, I think I quickly the idea of my having like a smooth social experience just felt so like just not in the books. I was, I feel sort of like I'm a twitchy person now, but like as a kid, I was just just a bundle of really like nervy energy. And yeah, so I think at a certain point I was like, look, I've like this is just even if I wanted it to be a space that was like open to me, like it is just not. It's not in the books. Like I'm not built that way,
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
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 So yeah, like record shops, comic stores, like those were and I went to I went to this sort of like old, very niche bookstore the other day and was just talking there and was just thinking like, oh yeah, like most of like I feel like so many like this is where I'm most at home is like being in a bookstore, like an extremely niche bookstore talking about like some extremely like niche subject with someone
Mhm.
like other like people who just like collect things or like looking at old things. I was like, yeah, this is kind of like where I've always felt the most like at home.
Are your parents like this?
Um, Not exactly. Like, there's lots of traits I've picked up from both of them, good and bad. um, but they're neither of them are quite that. But I did get my interest in comics from my dad because he had a lot of like both my parents liked comic strips. Like they had like Peanuts and Far Side collections.
Hmm.
And then Bloom County was a big one,
Yep.
but I think that was more my dad's interest. And then my dad also um, used to be like a superhero comics reader, and he threw out most of them just for like I'm an adult. Like I can't keep moving this long box of comics all the time. But the comics that he kept were like these really sacred objects to me as a kid because they were like slightly more adult than I should have been reading at like however old I was. Because one of them was the Mike Grell run of Green Arrow, which is like such a dorky thing, but it was like a little bit like more serious and like I think it dealt with like social issues and I was like whatever 8 or something. So I was like, oh, this is like an adult comic.
Mm.
And then the one comic that like I was obsessed with was he had one of the Dark Knight Returns issues,
Uh,
and I don't think he didn't real. I've talked about it. So he didn't realize that like I had found it and like then took it to my room and like was just studying it, and um, it was really not something like me as a 9 or 10 year old should have been reading. There's like one of the villains is like a woman who's topless and has 2 swastika decals like covering her breasts, and like it's like it's the Dark Knight Returns. It's like gritty. There's violence. Like I think it opens with like Batman disguised as a homeless woman or something, and then like like it's just like it's and as a kid, I was obsessed with it because I couldn't really It's like I know about Batman, right? Like the Batman movies and the Batman TV show, and then I'm reading about like this like weird, like weird Batman. He's like gross in this, like everything is like drawn weird. So I was like very obsessed with that, and then from there, just started reading superhero comics and like um, yeah, like most, some of it I look back on, I'm like, that was a great comic, and a lot of it, I'm like, I can't read this anymore, So like
yeah.
the usual thing that something you're interested in at that age.
Yeah. It's so interesting when adult things impinge on adult art impinges on your childhood because it's confusing. It is. I was gonna say titillating in a certain sense if sex is involved. Like I remember finding some like book, some just like sex farce book. I think written by Joan Rivers or something like that. That my parents had in their library. and I was like fascinated by it. I didn't understand any of it, and I was like, why does this exist? What is this? What is any of the stuff that they're even talking about? And that's such a weird feeling to have as a kid. And there's something slightly enjoyable about it. Because then,
Yeah, like it's great. It's like it feels like you're getting a little key to the adult world. Like that's I miss, like I can never have that feeling again. But the idea that like just by watching this, that would, I think movies are the other place that happens the most. Is like I stayed up a little too late, and there was a movie on TV that like I maybe shouldn't have seen, and maybe like scared me a little. But I'm also like now I only am thinking about this movie, like that. I'll never have that experience again. But the idea that just by taking in this piece of art, I'm like kind of getting away with something is like quite. It's very thrilling.
So, okay. Do you grow up in Ottawa? I found very few biographical details about you online, but I think that.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, I grew up in Ottawa. And I was there through high school, and then moved to Toronto for college.
I think partly because of the situation here, that's why politics was first in my mind. But also, I was thinking I'm like, well, that's the capital, right? I guess isn't there?
Yeah.
Is politics kind of just around in the air in Ottawa when you're growing up?
Yeah, definitely there. Both Toronto and Ottawa are conservative towns in different ways. Toronto more being like a finance town, but and both always like have histories that are much more interesting than being like government town or finance town. But Ottawa, similar to a lot of other capitals, like a lot of jobs there are related to the government or like that ecosystem. And neither of my parents had those jobs, but you just like it's just around. And it did have like a slightly so it had a bit of more of like a conservative feel to it, but also similar to like other kind of like stuffy cities, it did mean that it had a pretty interesting and vibrant like art and zine culture and punk scene. And it's been so long since I've been there that I truly have no sense of the state of any of those things now. But I'm pretty grateful. Like I think it was a pretty good scene to like incubate in, I guess. Like that, like people, when I look back, I try to think of like imagine myself if there was like a kid around today who was like 15 or 16 and interested in making posters, and like I think there would be people who would give them the time of day and be like, yeah, do a poster. Cool. Like, good to see you, man. Like, thanks for coming to the show. But like Toronto's so big and so competitive and so weird, like, and like that, I kind of have a hard time imagining that kid, like really, like I did like so many posters in Ottawa and I was like just some teenager, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. That's like an interesting thing. And it's hard to imagine that in like many other places where it's like, yeah, like why not let this kid just draw a bunch of things? Like it's just a concert.
It cost them nothing. They loved it.
Yeah, I mean that is true, but it's harder to imagine in other times or places. And I'm like really grateful that like people were so supportive and so generous with their time and like yeah, it's one of those things when I think like yeah, like I like to think I would be like encouraging to a young person like asking me for advice, like, but I know not everybody would be. And I felt like in Ottawa, like everyone was so kind, like there were dicks or whatever, like there were just people in the scene and like who were unpleasant. But I think of like how many people were just like, sure, like I'll have an hour conversation with you where I teach you how to silk screen, or like I teach you everything you're doing wrong silk screening. Like that's like that's so kind of them, and like I was just this over eager child, like bugging people, being like, tell me the history of hardcore. So, like just like, and people were so like happy to help me.
Well, I think that is the appeal of a lot. Yes, you're right. There can be assholes, but like the appeal of subcultures is that there is more empathy and more cohesion than you would find for especially people who are like interested and eager and want to learn than there would be normally. And if you just like went to Target and started asking someone, the manager, tell me about stocking. Tell me about stocking shelves. What's the best procedure? Right? Isn't that the
Yeah. But I
that's the
don't know. Maybe
appeal?
there's a cool Target subculture of like Target fans or something that are doing that. But
When I worked at supermarkets,
you had no one asking you that.
no, no.
Yeah.
The manager didn't care to teach me enough about my own job, let alone
Right.
a stranger who might walk in. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I think for like too, like it's one of the differences between like people talk about like what's a scene and what's a community, and like I think a scene is people who have like a shared aesthetic interest maybe, but a community ideally does have some of like that generational, like knowledge is getting passed on, even if the generation gap is like 5 years, like that can be a lot.
Yeah.
Like so sometimes I'll like now that I'm getting older or just officially older, I am older. Like that thing where you'll see a young person like making a zine in a way where it is costing them way more money than it needs to, and they're folding it weird. They're folding in that way where it has that big like it's hard to describe, but it has that big like gap in the middle, and you're just like, oh, like
Uh-huh.
right, that's like not a thing that you just intuitively pick up. Like there are ways to do, and yeah, and I do think about like, yeah, I benefit a lot from people like teaching me that stuff, and that wasn't stuff I learned in a school. It was stuff that people around me were telling me, who are a little bit older, and there are people a little bit older than that, and like passing on some of that.
Yeah. How did your parents end up in Ottawa if they didn't work in government? Are they from there?
They both worked in healthcare. My dad's a doctor, and my mom's a occupational therapist, and we lived in Calgary when I was very young, and then he worked in a hospital that got demolished due to like austerity, like cuts and stuff. So then I guess Ottawa was the place that was hiring, so we wound up there.
Oh, okay. So there wasn't like they weren't like excited about it? Question mark. Moving there.
That's a good question. I don't know. Like I don't think we would have moved if we didn't need to. But I don't think there was anything like about Calgary in particular that they were like, we love Calgary. My dad grew up in Ontario in sort of a small town. And then my mom is Chinese Filipino. So since then, she has like more, like roots in like a particular city. But at the time, I think like she had been in a few Canadian cities each for like the same amount of time, and I don't think had any particular affinity to any one of them. Like she was in Kingston, then Calgary, and then Ottawa.
When you say Chinese Filipino, do you mean she emigrated to immigrated to Canada, or you just mean that's her ethnicity?
No, she grew up. She's Chinese, grew up in the Philippines, and then moved to Canada for school.
But she liked it enough to stay.
Yeah, yeah, and she met my dad. They're divorced now, but
Okay.
But she met my dad, and then I assume that also had a factor in her staying, is like they got married. But yeah.
So you grew up in Ottawa. Is there a point where you are kind of deviating from quote unquote mainstream culture, or are you always kind of from the jump like this doesn't feel right?
I don't really. It's weird. I have a hard time remembering like too much of stuff as a like really young. Just aside from like kind of like getting bullied or whatever. But it was like it was already grade 9 or 10 where I was like interested in. Like I remember specifically it was grade 9 when I started reading Chester Brown and Joe Matt's comics, and they were kind of my introduction to like alternative comics. And it was because I went to a comic. My dad generously drove me to a Comic Con in Toronto, and while lining up for a superhero artist who I don't think even draws anymore, but he had a big lineup at the time. I forget his name. He did like. I think he had some sort of like his own publishing company, and then he owed a lot of people money. It'll come back to me. I'm like that dude. I think he was like run out of the industry. But I was lined up for him because I was a big fan at the time. and the line spilled over into like the artist alley. And at the artist alley, there was Seth, Joe Matt, and Chester Brown, who I didn't know from anybody. They were just like I was like artist alley. It's like yeah, where people have fan art, but they had their own drawn and quarterly comics. And I remember at the time, Seth seemed really weird to me because he was wearing like a suit, and I was like, why? Why is he dressed like this old timey man? And I love Seth, but I was just like, as like a 12 or 13-year-old, I was just like, why? Like, why would he be dressed like this here? Like,
Yeah.
And then, and his comics I was like, these are like really interesting looking, but they were, they it was like Palookaville, and I was like, I'm 12. I don't want to read about a man in a trench coat, like walking around. And I was like, not, it was like not my interest. But then the two that caught my eye were Peep Show, because it was Joe Matt's arc that was all about jacking off, and I'm sure I was just like, jacking off. I just found out about that. Like this,
Right.
I would love to read about this, And Chester Brown was in the middle of serializing Louis Riel, which I just covered in history class. Was like, I just learned about Louis. He was really interesting. He was like a cool, a Métis rebel, and I was like, I didn't, like. Not only did I not know there's a comic about this, I didn't even know like a comic about this could exist, and I bought them. And I remember specifically, yeah, like this was one of my fond Joe Matt memory, rest in peace, was he was like, he like turned to Seth and Chester and was like, am I allowed to sell this comic about like jacking off to this kid? And they all kind of conferred, and they were like, it's probably fun. And then he like made a little drawing in it and sold it to me, and I'm very grateful for that he I think maybe that's a good example of an adult, whether is that responsible of him or not, knowing that like it's exciting as a kid to like read something you're maybe like not supposed to be reading. And,
right. Again, it's that adult world impinging, entering into in a way that's like confusing and exciting, and like, is this what adulthood is? Like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, completely. It was completely that. And I loved both of those comics. And then from there, like when I was back in Ottawa at the comic store, it's like, oh yeah, right. There's that like weird rack of like the weird comics that like I was just like visual noise to me before, when I only wanted to like read X-Men. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, and got introduced to like Dan Clowes, Chris Ware, Mark Bell, Julie Doucet, Linda Berry, and just sort of and then became so ravenous and just like, I just want to see everything, and I felt like I had that kind of like basically up through my 20s, that like I just want to know everything about comics. Like even the stuff I don't like, I just want to like read and understand it, and then see the stuff that influenced that. And I just want everything. And I think it took a while for me to like, maybe because I felt like, all right, I've read enough now. I had so much of that. I was like, I just have to catch up with all of this stuff. Like there have been like decades of these like weird comics, and there's zines that haven't been collected. I want these zines. And then like there's this whole other country that's been making comics that's not here. Like I got to see that stuff. So yeah.
Was it always going to be comics though? Was it always going to be art, or was there ever anything else that piqued your interest?
I think it was always going to be art, but when I initially went to school, like I didn't study art. I went, I was thought. I mean, I dropped out kind of before it got into anything, but I was in a humanities program with the intention of going into philosophy, and what I thought I actually wanted to do was write prose. Like I was making mini comics and drawing a lot of posters, but I kind of thought the way I express myself best is through prose, so that's what I should pursue. And then I don't know what it was where I was like, no, it's comics. It's like, it's not prose. I'm not a great prose writer. It was probably that. I probably at some point realized like, like here are other people my age writing prose, and they seem way better than me. Maybe I should, maybe I should step off this path and step onto the comics path, where I feel a little more like it's less like comics has always felt just the most intuitive. Maybe because it combines a bunch of interests I have, um, and it's like comics. I don't have to like be the best at drawing or be the best at writing, but I combine both, and that's enough. Maybe that's how I felt about it. Um, but yeah, I for a while I thought like I poetry and prose act. I thought I could be a poet maybe also. Just I was more confident in my writing than I was drawing. And yeah, I would guess it was being around more writers. I stopped being as confident in my writing and was like,
Oh,
maybe I should like take some of these eggs in the writing basket and put them back in the drawing basket.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think about these dynamics because some of it's contingent, right? Some of it is kind of like maybe if you had hung around with people who were shitty at writing, then you would have been like, oh, I'm great. And then that's the direction you would have gone in. Or if maybe that's the thing you had started doing when you were younger, as opposed to drawing, and then cultivated that as a skill. Because some of it's like that too, right? Like, but the thing you said, the word you used was intuitive. And I'm wondering, is it just an intuition that you cultivated through being an artist for so long? Or did you have an affinity for it when you were younger and then kind of gravitated towards it because of that, whatever, the way your brain was set up, whatever, I don't know how you want to characterize it.
Yeah, I was definitely always drawing. Like when I was really young, I was tracing like Peanuts and Far Side strips and stuff, and um, yeah, and like drawing. Then a few years later, drawing superhero comics. Yeah, I know my parents have stories of me like drawing on the walls. Like I just always drew. So I don't. It's one of those things where I don't remember when I cultivated an interest in drawing. I just know I always drew. Like it was, like almost like compulsive for many years of my life, where I I couldn't focus in school unless, like, much to the chagrin of a lot of my teachers, I couldn't focus in school unless I was like drawing on something. And to this day, like if I'm in a meeting or something, it's like easier for me to talk and focus if I'm like also just like my hands are active, like scribbling on a page or like hashing something out. Yeah.
Even if you're interested in the thing, or is it out of boredom?
Even if I'm interested in the thing, sometimes it's out of boredom. But like, and a meeting, sometimes a meeting can be both of those things. But yeah, like sometimes for meetings, like especially if it's, I mean, this will come up in like organizing meetings, where if it's something that's like kind of tricky to think through, it actually is helpful if my hands are active. Like it's easier for me to like piece through a problem or like puzzle something out. And I try to be both like not be rude, and also there's like a range within that, because like if I'm like trying to talk to someone more one-on-one, or if there's like something like it's like I have to like kind of emote or be more present or appear more present, I can like turn that dial in different ways. But yeah, like left to my own devices, usually I have to like be doing something with my hands, and that something is usually drawing.
I asked that because most of my schooling, the only way I could stay interested, because a lot of it, especially in grad school, when the philosophy that I didn't realize there was good philosophy. I just thought I would get little bits of it and I would be like, well, I'll just study that. I didn't realize those little bits were actually part of a larger tradition that I wasn't being told about here in America. And so a lot of the schooling was very dry, logic-based garbage. And so I would draw to stay to like, because it would be like 5% interesting and 95% like I'm going to fall asleep if I don't fill in that 95% with something more. And so I would just draw. I mean, I can't draw. I'm shitty at it, but like, that's why I'm like, it seems like it's something like you use the word compulsory, right?
Yeah. Like there's a compulsion to the way I sometimes do things, where I'm just like, yeah, like it's like a muscle thing. Like, yeah.
And is that just the way you're set up? Like, that's just your biology?
I think so. Like, I don't, it's again, like, I don't know how I came to it exactly, but it is just for as long as I can remember, has been the case. And yeah, like I just my lifestyle has changed and I don't go drinking in bars alone as much as I used to. But like throughout my 20s, that would kind of be like I would just be in bars drawing like for hours and like um because it would be like, well, I can't really sleep, so I should go drinking and then bring my sketchbook and then just sort of like um yeah. And now I have I have a cat, so I'm not I'm not always out every night, But yeah,
Sure.
like I just always have uh my hands are scribbling something.
Yeah. Is it an anxiety thing at all?
Maybe. Like I am a generally anxious person, but I don't even know if it's that like soothing. It's almost just like a natural, like it just feels like I mean, at some point, stuff just becomes a habit too. Like, so
Hmm.
maybe there's an aspect of that. Like, and it's a habit I've never really thought. Like, it could be that. Like, I'm definitely anxious a lot, and like, so I'm sure it it helps more than it hurts. Especially for yeah, like stuff. I think there's something like grounding to the physical act of like putting even if it's like a digital tablet or something, there's something grounding about like having the pen drag against some
Sure.
surface, like feeling that like friction is like yeah, there's something grounding to the act of drawing.
Yeah. I'm interrogating this so much because I'm always curious about these kind of like very minor things that happen when you're a kid that then blossom to become the thing that you do or the thing. I mean, I'm sure that it's more than just like an occupation. It's your identity, right?
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
starts off somewhat, I would say, innocuously, I suppose, then, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like I yeah, like really, early on I was making zines and I don't think I had some clear vision of like what I was gonna do with them. But like I remember early comics I made even before I knew to like photocopy them. Like I did like it was interesting where I was reading all these superhero comics and wanting to draw superheroes and then um I don't even think I had read an EC comic. I just saw some covers of EC comics and I don't even really love EC comics, but I just hadn't seen these horror comics
Mm-hmm.
before and at that age, like 12 or 11 or something, and I thought like these covers are so cool, like they're kind of gory and like I just found them really interesting. And I remember like my first finished like short story, like I did a 20-page comic. I'm sure I just drew in like a binder was like a horror comic. Even though I like hadn't actually like read a horror comic yet, I was like watched whatever movies I could see on TV and I was think like, yeah, it's kind of funny that I gravitated towards that genre so early on. Um, Even though like what I thought I would do is like draw the Flash or draw Spider-Man. It was like
Uh-huh.
when it came down to it, I chose horror somehow, and like now as an adult, that is still the genre I like. Like I would say when I started my career, I was like very known as I think I was almost like pigeonholed as a horror artist, and I've done a wider range of genres since then. But I think my default has like a bit of the horror tone always. Like the horror element will always be a part of my work, even if it's not in every book. And I just find it like, yeah, like it's funny that I gravitated towards horror first. Like it, and I don't know why, but it, and all it took was just like seeing some EC covers, like not even reading the comics, which when I did finally read, I thought were kind of like boring, like too many
Sure.
words,
Right. It's all just
So.
corny, kind of like Twilight Zoney type stuff at this point.
Yeah, and there's other stuff like that I like, but for some reason the EC horror like never like I can recognize the skill and craft and how important they were, but I'm like, yeah, it's still like I can watch old Universal Studios movies and love them, and I don't know why the EC comics like never really hit for me.
But like, wait, is it literally just like there was something aesthetically appealing about those covers that you kind of gravitated towards because it was interesting, or is there some deeper kind of feeling about horror for you?
I do think like there is a thing with horror where like I'm fascinated by like as a kid certainly like I was fascinated by like here's an image of like a rotting corpse, and like I loved that. I was like, you know, classic maladjusted kid. Like this is so cool. Like I'm gonna look up gross stuff on the internet. Like I definitely was that kid, you know, like and since then I can articulate the things that like interest me about the horror genre when I work on it now, or when I like I watch a lot of horror movies, like when I engage with that stuff generally. At the time I definitely couldn't articulate it, but like now I'm like, yeah, like I like body horror in particular, which is like such a almost like too popular a genre, but like the things that are interesting about body horror that were interesting to me as a kid remain interesting to me today, where it's both like horrifying and repulsive, but also kind of like appealing, and like there's like weird parts that can be kind of like liberating in a way in the body. That's usually what makes for interesting body horror, is like it's not just it's gross,
Right.
but it's not just gross. Like maybe it's like kind of liberating, or maybe it's kind of sexy, or maybe there's some like appeal to it in some way. And as a kid, that was certainly the case. Like looking at, um, yeah, like whether it's like a rotting corpse or some sort of body in pain or something, like that's why I kept gravitating towards those images.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it. There was a movie when I was a kid called The Gate, where about
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, you know, about for the listener, two kids accidentally summon demons while their parents are away. The demons take over the house, and I remember this image that is stuck in my head since I was a kid was at one point the one kid's hand, an eye forms in the palm of the hand, and that image was so captivating, I suppose, and so scary. The idea that my body could change, and now I'm just like paranoid about cancer. Like every time I go to the doctor, I'm just like, here it is. They're gonna say I have it, and I'm sure that that stuff is linked in some psychological way.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and like I find too, my relationship to body horror changes with every like as my own body changes. You know, like as a teenager, body horror is interesting because you're going through puberty, and then in my 20s, um, uh, like I was sort of going through like a rolling mental health crisis for like a decade, but also at the same time, like I stopped feeling as much agency over my own body, and um, body horror became interesting in that way. And now like I'm approaching my late 30s, in my late 30s, and you know, like my body's breaking down as that happens, and
Sure.
I'm thinking about like illness and death, and people around me are getting sick, you know, and it's like, well, now I have this new relationship to bodies and my body, and
Hmm.
I assume that will continue. Like, you know, it's not going to get smoother as a it's not going to be smoother sailing, you know, and throughout all those times, like I for a long time, like I was like really abusing my body, and now I'm abusing it somewhat, but I'm also like very into running, and like I'm very like disciplined about. So I just I think that's like an interesting part of any sort of genre or media that like resonates with you, is that it resonates with you. You like learn more about it, and you learn more about yourself through it as you get older.
This actually dovetails into what I am. The one thing I'm still curious about, kind of from where we started talking, but my reaction to body horror when I was younger, and my reaction to having a body was to wish I didn't. I like the idea of being a mind of like Cartesian duality. I didn't understand what that meant when I was a kid, but like the idea that like, no, what I really am is a mind, and this is just a husk and all this other stuff. And it took me a while to just accept like, no, you're just some meat, and you gotta like deal with that, and you gotta accept it, and that there's no other way to like advance, whatever that means. There's no other way to be human.
Yeah, yeah,
Just deal with it.
yeah.
Just deal with it, Andy. Took me a while to do that. It seems like you accepted it when you were younger, and you were just like, yes, you know, I could have a. I'm trying to think. What was the first Cronenberg I saw? Weirdly, it was like Existence, which is like, I don't know.
Oh, sure.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
isn't there like some like kind of like mechanical device in the guy's stomach or something like that? It's been a while since I've seen it, but like,
I mean, that would be like assuming we're like probably roughly the same age.
yeah, I'm
Like, and
slightly
that
older,
kind of
but
when you get into like when we would have been getting into like the age where we would have been watching a Cronenberg movie, like that would have been the one that would be like just out, right?
Right.
So like that totally makes sense. I mean, I saw that one, yeah, I was like probably a little too young to like fully get it, and
Oh, I was
that
totally.
had yeah, and but that had like an image that stayed with me that I still love, which is like the kind of organic gun
Mm.
thing. It's like
Yes, that's what I was thinking
like
of. Yes, that.
yeah, yeah. Like, and I think about that like as a kid, I was just like, what what is this? Um and it was also one of those things like at that age where I was like that image is so cool. Why isn't this a movie about like everybody just using like weapons like that? Like that, like why is this like a weird like neo noir creepy mystery? Like why isn't this a movie about like people with cool like organic guns? I'm sure that was my thought at the age, and now I'm like it's that image really yeah, definitely like stuck with me.
But you accepted it. You accepted. I don't mean like the idea that of a organic gun or whatever, but like being embodied. You accepted that. It seems like when you were younger, you were okay living in gray areas, living with contradictions in a way that I wasn't. And I want to know, is that true? And if so, what allowed you to flourish in gray areas, in contradictions, in confusion, perhaps?
I don't know if I definitely like was less accepting of it at the time, and especially in like in my teens, I was just like a frustrated teenager, just like why why does everything suck so bad? And some of that was related to the world around me, and some of it was like this sucks. I hate being a teenager. Like I'm like I have pimples. I'm scrawny. Like this is unpleasant.
Yeah.
And then in my 20s, like it wasn't like some sort of severe health crisis, but I was going through like a fairly acute mental health crisis. And at the same time, some of that was related to things with my body. Like I have atrial fibrillation and I still have it, but at the time it was very just like, it was just like running wild. Like for a while, I wasn't sure if they were panic attacks. And I, eventually like figured it out. And like my dad has it, like I'm like familiar with it and it's like a manageable thing. And there are just other things like related to my physical being where it felt, and just my mental health was very directly linked to my physical health. So I was like both not taking care of myself and it was manifesting in like crazy ways. Like I would, um, yeah, like I was just like so stressed out. Like my immune system was so depleted from the stress. I wasn't like sleeping for like, I don't think I slept for like my 20s. I think of that time like I'm already a light sleeper, but I think of my 20s as like, yeah, I didn't sleep, I would stay up all night. I'd be drinking during the day and drawing comics all day, and it was just like a really horrible mess. I got um and I think about it, and it felt like a struggle. I didn't really feel like I had any agency over like what to do about it. It wasn't like I was trying to escape, aside from like the very like I tried to kill myself a billion times, but like aside from that very obvious way, it didn't really feel like there was any other thing. So I don't know if I fantasized about some sort of alternative. I felt very like I am in the weeds in this body, and it is like a body that is like full of like miswired brain synapses and like
Uh-huh.
and like a bad heart, and like I felt like that a lot. Um, and at some point, I think my relationship started to change, both because I was no longer in crisis and was able to like the way it would manifest physically was less acute. It wasn't like I was breaking out into rashes randomly all the time, which was sort of what was happening before. And I think my relationship with like my body now is that I feel like it's still somewhat antagonistic, but I feel like I'm very much about like disciplining every like like I'm not like super rigid. I'm not like one of those guys on TikTok who is like I wake up at 5 in the morning and like I like put 3 pounds of kale into a blender and then dunk my head in ice water or whatever. But
Right.
um now I am like kind of aware of like here's how much steam is like a reasonable amount to let out. Here are like what substances are safe to enjoy, and here's like what's not safe for me to enjoy. and the running has really felt like this is a little bit of a way of like wearing my body into submission, where like some of the anxiety or the stress I feel.
Uh-huh.
I think what I like about running is like I can't really like de-stress in like a like I'm just gonna relax and like put up my feet. That doesn't de-stress me. I feel like if I'm feeling like tension or anxiety or anger or other things, it's like I literally just have to like exhaust myself until I physically can't feel those things. And running is quite good for that because I was like the missing. It's like I went to therapy and I was like, okay, here's like the feelings I have that are rational. Here are the feelings I have that are irrational. Here's how to like behave in the world. Here's how to um, not let it like dictate every aspect of my life and stuff. And one of the missing pieces was just like running, which I do think of, and it could have just as easily been like I got into boxing, like some other random thing.
Right.
And I'm not even like that serious about training anymore, but like running is so integral for for me. Like it's hard for me to work and to like think if I don't have something that like um, once a morning I like wear my body down to the point of like total depletion, and then it's like okay, now I can start my day. I'm like focused, you know.
Oh, so do you think it's more about finding an algorithm or rules or a boundary that works for you? I was trying to think of like how to really characterize this, and I'm like, for me, I'm just like whatever the contradictions in life are, I'm kind of like, at least at this moment, and feel just awful here in the United States. So
Yes.
slightly different, but like, I feel like I'm just bouncing around from like one kind of crisis to another, just trying to find like some moments of peace. It seems like if you've had figured out like, yes, there's all this confusion or contradictions or gray areas that are either inside me or that I live in. And if I can figure out a way to contain it, then I can exist. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's true. I need a lot of things to like kind of feel grounded because, and I think there's like a lot of different parts of my life where there are different grounding elements, and some of them are obvious, like my relationship or some of my friendships or whatever. But, um, like routine is certainly like a big thing, and I feel like this is a lot of people. I have this ideal routine, and is my ideal like this is the routine I have where this is like the way I can focus on work, and then I have some time to whatever cook and run, and then I can do a bit more work, and then I can watch a movie, and then go to bed or whatever. You know, like I have this ideal routine, and then life is just like here's all these like interruptions to it, and like
Right.
figure this out. But
Right.
it helps to have a bunch of grounding things, and I think there's like things related to there's like lots of ways I need to feel like politically grounded. Some of that is like belonging to a political organization. I think is like very important to like feel accountable to a movement, accountable to like a group of comrades, and accountable to an organization. And then I think there's things that are like even just ground me like physically. I was like I really like having a pet, both because I love my cat, but also because it's like, okay, no matter what else is like going on, like I have to feed this cat, and like I have to like whatever else is going on, like this cat has zoomies and I have to like deal with this right like whatever the
You have
thing
to
is,
clean
and
the
it's
litter
like
box. It has to. There's no way around it. You
it is
could
like
be
truly
exhausted. It's midnight. Got to clean the litter box.
it is truly that. And there's a stretch last year where I was like maybe at my most unhinged for last year, where it was just had a confluence of things where like I was like awake for 72 hours like working, and a lot of it was like related to the organizing side of my life. And I remember at some point like I hadn't slept, and there was like a police confrontation had just sort of like subsided. There was just like a lot of stuff, and I was like, okay, I have to go back and feed my cat. Like I'll like this immediate crisis is over. Like I'll be back in like 45 minutes. I have to like feed my cat, and then I have to like give it a little bit of attention, and then I'll be back, and I it's like really helpful to have that. I suppose I could have that also if I just had a kid, but having a cat is easier. So
Yeah.
for now, I'm just, cat.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael, thank you so much for joining
Oh,
me.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
This was an absolute delight. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.